On a fading summer evening, the old mechanic's garage sat quietly at the edge of a dusty highway, its metal walls glowing gold under the last bit of sunlight. Inside, the tools hanging on the wall cast long, familiar shadows. The place wasn't fancy, just old concrete floors, an oil-stained workbench, and the smell of steel and engine grease that never fully went away. But to the man who worked there, it was home. His name was Walter Harris, a gray-haired mechanic in his late 60s, known by everyone in town for his steady hands, warm smile, and the kind of patience only a lifetime of hard work could teach. Walter had just finished adjusting a carburetor when he looked up and noticed someone standing at the open doorway. It was a young man, thin, exhausted, and soaked in sweat and dirt. His shirt clung to him. His backpack looked worn to the bone, and his eyes carried the tired heaviness of someone who had walked far too long with nowhere to go. Walter recognized that look immediately. He had seen it in soldiers returning home, in drifters passing through, and once, many years ago, in himself. The young man didn't speak. He just stood there quietly, almost unsure if he even deserved to be seen. Walter wiped his hands on a rag, walked forward slowly, and without a single question, placed a steaming burger on a metal plate. Then he held it out toward the boy with both hands, almost like he was offering something far more meaningful than food. "You need this, son," Walter said gently, his voice warm and steady. The boy's eyes widened for a moment. Hunger, disbelief, and gratitude mixed together on his face. He stepped forward hesitantly, as though kindness this direct felt unfamiliar. The steam rising from the burger curled in the cool evening air, drifting between them like a small bridge of comfort. Walter didn't ask why the boy looked lost. He didn't ask where he came from or what mistakes he might have made. He simply saw someone who needed help, and that was enough. The young man finally accepted the plate, holding it with both hands as though afraid it might vanish. Walter nodded toward a stool inside the garage. "Come on in," he said. "No one stands in the doorway when they're hungry." For the first time in a long while, the boy took a breath that didn't feel heavy. And he stepped inside. The young man followed Walter into the garage, moving slowly as if unsure whether he truly belonged there. His clothes were still damp. His hair stuck to his forehead, and his shoulders slumped from days of carrying more weight than his backpack could explain. Walter motioned toward an old wooden stool beside the workbench. The boy sat down carefully, holding the warm burger like it was the first real meal he'd had in days. Golden evening light slipped through the dusty windows, pooling around him and making the steam from the burger glow softly. For a minute, he didn't speak, he just ate, quietly, almost gratefully, taking small bites as though trying to make the moment last. Walter leaned against the counter, giving him space, not pushing him for details. He had learned long ago that people who hurt often needed silence more than questions. After a while, Walter broke the stillness with a gentle tone. "Haven't seen you around here before," he said. "You passing through?" The boy hesitated, swallowing hard before answering. "Yeah, just moving from place to place." His voice was low, almost hoarse, like he hadn't talked much recently. "Didn't plan on stopping, just needed a minute." Walter nodded slowly. "Everyone needs a minute now and then." The boy looked around the garage, the scattered wrenches, the half-fixed engine, the shelves full of tools that had seen years of service. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. Safe in a way he hadn't felt for a long while. "You got a name, son?" Walter asked, not demanding, just offering a chance for the boy to be seen. The young man stared at the burger for a moment before answering. "Eli," he said quietly. "My name's Eli." "Well, Eli," Walter replied with a small smile. "You're welcome to rest here as long as you need to finish that meal. No rush." Eli nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. He wasn't sure why, but for the first time in days, he felt something other than fear or exhaustion. He felt human again. And somewhere deep down, Walter sensed this boy had walked through more storms than he was letting on. When Eli finished the last bite of his meal, he set the empty plate gently on the workbench, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the quiet comfort that had settled between them. He pulled the strap of his worn backpack over one shoulder and stood up slowly, glancing toward the open doorway. The sky outside, moments ago glowing with soft evening light, had shifted into a heavy gray. Low clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the last bit of color from the horizon. I should get going, Eli murmured, avoiding eye contact. Don't want to be a bother. Before Walter could respond, a sudden crack of thunder shook the garage walls. A moment later the rain came down hard, thick, heavy sheets that blurred everything beyond a few feet. Water splashed through the dirt outside, turning the ground into a shallow, muddy mess. Eli froze at the threshold, his shoulders tensing as he realized stepping outside meant walking straight into a storm he wasn't prepared for. Walter watched him quietly. He had seen storms like this too many times, and he knew what it meant for someone traveling alone with nothing but a thin backpack and tired legs. "You're not walking out in that," Walter said firmly, not harsh. "Just certain. Storm like this can soak you through in minutes." Eli shook his head lightly, still staring at the rain as if trying to convince himself he could handle it. "I'll be fine. I've walked through worse." "Maybe," Walter replied, "but not tonight." Eli turned slightly, meeting Walter's eyes for the first time since he finished eating. There was hesitation there, mixed with exhaustion and something that looked a lot like quiet desperation. Walter stepped closer and pointed toward the small back room of the garage. "I've got an old cot in there," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's dry. You can stay until the rain lets up." Eli looked back at the storm. The wind howled under the metal roof, and rain hammered against the garage door like thousands of tiny fists. He let out a breath he'd been holding and nodded slowly. "Just for a little while," Eli said. Walter smiled, soft, understanding. "That's all it needs to be." Eli stepped away from the doorway and deeper into the garage, leaving the storm behind him. For the first time in a long stretch of lonely days, he wasn't walking into the unknown. He was stepping toward shelter. Walter led Eli toward the back of the garage, passing shelves full of spare parts and old cardboard boxes that had been there longer than most of the cars Walter had ever fixed. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, buzzing faintly as it flickered on. Behind a narrow doorway was a small room, bare, plain, but clean. A folded cot leaned against the wall, a thin mattress resting on top of it, and a small heater sat in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Walter opened the cot with practiced ease and spread the mattress out. "This old thing's held up for years," he said lightly. "Not the softest bed in the world, but it beats sleeping out in the rain." Eli stood near the doorway, looking unsure of what to do with himself. His clothes were still damp from earlier, and stray droplets clung to his hair. He kept shifting the strap of his backpack as if unsure whether he should take it off or be ready to leave at any moment. "You can set your bag down," Walter added gently, noticing the boy's hesitation. "Nobody's gonna take anything from you here." Slowly, Eli loosened his grip and placed the backpack at the foot of the cot. He sat down on the edge of the mattress, staring at his worn-out shoes. Mud clung to the soles, and the laces were frayed from miles of walking. He rubbed his hands together, unsure whether he should speak or stay silent. Walter draped a blanket over the cot and then placed a second one beside it. "Nights get chilly around here," he said. "Use both if you need to." Eli nodded quietly. "Thank you. I didn't expect any of this." Walter shrugged like kindness was the most ordinary thing in the world. "World's hard enough already. No point making it harder." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the heavy rain outside filled the silence, steady, rhythmic, almost calming. Eli finally looked up, and in the dim light, his eyes showed something beyond exhaustion, a mix of relief and disbelief that someone had offered him a place to rest without wanting anything in return. Walter gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Get some sleep, Eli. Tomorrow will look better when you're not running on empty." Eli pulled the blanket over his lap, the warmth already easing the tension from his body. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could close his eyes without fear. And as the storm raged outside, the small room behind the old garage became the safest place he'd known in years. Morning came quietly. The storm had passed sometime during the night, leaving the air cool and the ground still damp. Soft sunlight slipped through the narrow window of the small room, settling on Eli's face. He blinked awake slowly, confused for a moment about where he was, until he remembered the warm blanket. The cot, and Walter's steady voice telling him to rest. It had been the first peaceful sleep he'd had in weeks. Eli sat up, stretched his sore shoulders, and listened. From outside, he heard the familiar clank of tools and the low rumble of an engine being coaxed back to life. Walter was already at work. Eli stepped out of the room, the floorboards cool beneath his feet. When he pushed open the back door, he saw Walter leaning over the open hood of an old pickup truck, wiping grease from his hands as the engine sputtered in protest. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard, highlighting the rows of worn tires and metal scrap piled neatly against the fence. Walter glanced up when he noticed Eli, offering a small smile. "Morning, son. Sleep all right?" "Yeah," Eli replied, his voice softer, calmer than the night before. "Thank you, really." Walter nodded, turning back to the engine. "Truck's been giving me trouble for days. Could use an extra pair of hands if you're feeling up to it." Eli hesitated only a moment before stepping closer. He didn't know much about engines, but the offer felt like something more than just work. It felt like trust. "What do you need me to do?" Eli asked. Walter handed him a rag. "Start by wiping down those hoses. We'll see where we go from there." Eli nodded and got to work, moving carefully, almost afraid of messing something up. His motions were uncertain at first, but he paid close attention to Walter's instructions, mimicking each step. Walter didn't rush him or correct him harshly, he simply guided him patiently. One small task at a time. "You pick things up quick," Walter said after a few minutes. Eli looked surprised. "I've never worked on cars before." "Well, you're doing just fine." For the first time that morning, Eli felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but a quiet sense of belonging, as he wiped grease from the hoses. Standing beside a man who expected nothing from him except effort, Eli realized he hadn't felt this grounded in a very long time. The sun climbed higher, warming the yard, and in that simple moment, fixing an old engine with an old mechanic, Eli felt the first small shift toward hope. By the time the truck finally sputtered into a steady idle, the sun had risen high enough to warm the front of the garage. Walter wiped his hands on a rag, satisfied with the morning's work. Eli stepped back as well, breathing a little harder than he expected. Even small tasks had taken effort, but for the first time in a long while, he felt useful. "Good work," Walter said. "Engine hasn't sounded this steady in weeks." Eli gave a small smile, tired, but genuine. Walter motioned toward the open garage door. "Come on, let's get some breakfast in you before we both fall over." Inside the workshop, Walter set 2 metal mugs on the table and filled them with simple black coffee from an old thermos. Then he pulled out a paper bag from the counter, 2 ham and egg sandwiches wrapped in foil. No fancy spread, no restaurant portions, just real food made with real care. Eli sat across from him, the light from the window landing softly on his face. The warmth of the sandwich seeped through the foil into his hands, reminding him again of how long it had been since he sat at a table like this, without fear, without rushing. Walter took a sip of coffee. "Been working in this garage for over 40 years, he said, his tone easy and steady. "Started when I was just a kid sweeping floors. Back then, didn't know a wrench from a tire iron." Eli listened quietly, taking small bites, feeling his body relax in a way he wasn't accustomed to. Walter's voice carried the kind of wisdom that didn't need to be forced, it flowed naturally, shaped by years of steady work and hard-earned patience. "Things weren't always smooth," Walter continued. "Lost my wife early, raised my daughter on my own. Ran this place mostly by grit and prayer." He gave a soft chuckle. "Some days, mostly prayer." Eli lowered his eyes. "Sounds like you've been through a lot." "Everyone has," Walter replied. "What matters is how you get back up, and who helps you along the way." Eli held the mug of coffee tightly, letting the warmth settle in his chest. For a moment, he wanted to say more, about the nights he'd slept under bridges, the jobs that fell through, the people who gave up on him, but the words stayed trapped somewhere deep. Walter didn't press. He simply nodded, as if understanding more than Eli had spoken. "Eat up," Walter said gently. "You're safe here, at least for now." And as the quiet morning drifted through the garage, Eli realized he wasn't just sharing breakfast. He was sharing a moment of calm he hadn't felt in years. After breakfast, the warm midday sun settled over the garage, lighting up the dust motes drifting gently in the air. The storm from the previous night had washed everything clean, leaving the world outside bright and sharp. Inside, the garage felt almost peaceful, like a place where time moved slower than everywhere else. Walter set his coffee mug aside and motioned Eli over to the workbench. "All right, son," he said, "if you're gonna be around for a bit, might as well learn a thing or two." Eli stepped closer, his posture unsure but attentive. Walter picked up a metal tool with a rubber handle. "This here's a socket wrench. Basic, but useful. Most jobs start and end with one of these." He handed it to Eli, who took it carefully, turning it in his hands like it was something fragile. Walter didn't laugh or tease him. Instead, he explained each part: the ratchet, the extension, the socket sizes lined up like little steel soldiers on the table. Eli listened to every word, nodding slowly. He wasn't quick, but he was focused, really focused. Like learning this mattered in a way he couldn't fully explain. "Try loosening that bolt right there," Walter said, pointing to an old engine block resting on a stand. Eli knelt beside it, fitted the socket clumsily, then tried again until it clicked into place. He applied pressure, face tightening with effort, and the bolt finally gave way with a sharp metallic snap. "There you go," Walter said with a satisfied nod. "Told you, you learn fast." Eli gave a small smile, shy, almost hidden. "Feels good to do something right," he admitted. Walter leaned against the workbench, arms crossed loosely. "Everybody's gotta start somewhere. You keep at it. This stuff'll come natural." Sunlight streamed through the open door, landing on both of them as they worked. Walter showed him how to check oil levels, tighten hoses, replace a filter. Eli repeated each task, slower than an experienced hand would, but with care that told Walter the boy wanted to earn the moment, wanted to belong somewhere, even if just for a while. As Eli wiped grease from his fingers, Walter watched him quietly. There was something familiar in the boy's effort, something that reminded him of his younger self, lost, searching, trying to rebuild a life piece by piece. For the first time that day, Walter felt a small sense of purpose return. And for the first time in years, Eli felt like he had someone willing to teach him, not judge him. Under the warm noon sun, in that old garage full of tools and history, something simple but important began to form. A connection neither of them had expected. By noon, the garage had warmed up, filled with that familiar mix of sunlight, metal, and the faint smell of engine oil. The quiet after breakfast lingered in the air as Walter pushed open the large sliding door, letting a stream of bright light spill across the concrete floor. Eli followed behind him, still holding the rag he'd used earlier, unsure of what the rest of the day would bring. Walter tapped the side of an old tool cabinet. "Come here, Eli. Time to show you a bit more than wiping down hoses." Eli stepped closer, watching as Walter pulled out a few tools: pliers, a torque wrench, and a small metal gauge. He laid each item neatly on the workbench as if arranging pieces of a puzzle he'd solved thousands of times. "Every mechanic starts with the basics," Walter said. "Doesn't matter where you came from. What matters is you're willing to learn." Eli nodded quietly. Something about Walter's voice made him straighten his posture, like he didn't want to let the old man down. Walter picked up the torque wrench. "This one's for tightening bolts to the right pressure," he explained. "Too loose and things fall apart. Too tight and you break the part. Life's kind of the same way." He handed the wrench to Eli, who took it carefully with both hands. The weight surprised him. It felt heavier than it looked. Walter guided him to a dusty engine block resting on a stand near the back wall. "Go ahead," Walter said. "Try tightening that top bolt. Slow and steady." Eli positioned the wrench the way Walter showed him, adjusting his grip twice before getting it right. When he pushed down, the bolt shifted with a firm click. Eli's eyes lifted slightly, the smallest hint of pride appearing in them. Walter gave a short approving nod. "Good, you've got a steady hand. That's worth more than you realize." For the next several minutes, Walter walked him through the names of different tools and what they were used for. Eli repeated each one softly under his breath, trying to memorize them. He wasn't fast, but he was focused, more focused than he had been on anything in a long time. At one point, Walter stepped back and watched him. Eli didn't notice. He was too busy trying to line up a socket set in order, wiping each piece clean before placing it back down. "You remind me of myself at your age," Walter said finally. Eli blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yeah," Walter replied. "Didn't know a thing about engines back then. But I knew how to try. That's all this place ever needed." Eli looked down, but this time not out of shame, more like someone unsure how to accept a compliment. The warm noon light settled over them as they worked side by side. For the first time, Eli wasn't just passing through. He was learning, slowly, quietly, how to stay. By mid-afternoon, the sun had shifted to the western side of the garage, casting long beams of warm light across the floor. After spending hours learning tools and practicing small tasks, Eli wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked around the workshop. The place was cluttered, boxes stacked in corners, old parts scattered near the shelves, and oily rags left from earlier repairs. Without being asked, he picked up a broom leaning against the wall. Walter noticed but didn't say a word. He simply stepped aside, giving the boy space to decide what he wanted to do next. Eli began sweeping slowly at first, moving the broom across the concrete in careful strokes. Dust rose into the sunlight, making the air sparkle briefly before settling again. He moved from one corner to another, collecting bolts that had rolled under tables, folding rags, stacking the toolboxes neatly against the wall. Sometimes he paused, unsure where something belonged, but he always took his time to find the right spot. His movements were still hesitant, but there was purpose in them, purpose Walter hadn't seen when the boy first arrived. Walter leaned against the open doorway, arms loosely crossed, watching without interrupting. There was something steady and comforting in the way Eli worked. No complaints, no rushing, just quiet effort, like he was trying to repay a debt no one had asked him to owe. "You know," Walter said after a few minutes, "most folks don't bother cleaning up unless they're told." Eli glanced up, a little startled. "I just figured it needed to be done. And it's the least I can do." Walter nodded slowly. "Not everyone sees it that way." Eli bent down again, gathering a handful of stray washers. He placed them carefully into a small metal bin and wiped his hands on his jeans. "I don't want to cause trouble here," he said softly. "I just want to help. If I can." Walter studied him for a moment. There was honesty in the boy's voice, nothing forced, nothing put on, just sincerity shaped by hard roads and too many nights without a place to call home. "You're doing fine, Eli," Walter replied. "More than fine." Eli paused at those words, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't something he was used to. He lowered his head and kept sweeping, though his shoulders lifted just a little, as if a weight had loosened. As the sunlight dimmed toward early evening, the garage looked different, cleaner, more organized, almost refreshed. Walter took in the sight with a quiet pride he didn't express out loud. In just a day, the boy had changed the feel of the place. And whether Eli realized it or not, he had begun to change Walter's days too. By early evening, the heat of the day had faded, leaving a cool breeze drifting lazily across the yard. The sky turned shades of tangerine and soft purple as the sun dipped behind the trees lining the quiet road. Walter stepped outside and settled onto an old wooden bench just outside the garage door, his hands resting on his knees. The hum of cicadas echoed faintly in the distance. Inside, Eli finished putting away the last of the tools before stepping out to join him. He hesitated for a moment, then sat on the opposite end of the bench. Neither of them spoke at first. They just watched the last bit of sunlight melt into the horizon, letting the calm settle around them. "You did good work today," Walter said eventually, his tone easy and matter-of-fact. Eli looked down at his hands, still stained faintly with grease. "I just wanted to help. You didn't have to let me stay, or teach me anything." Walter shrugged lightly. "Didn't figure you'd hurt the place. And everyone deserves a chance to get their feet under them." Eli let out a slow breath. "It's been a long time since I felt steady. Most days I'm just thinking about where to go next, where to sleep, whether someone's going to run me off." Walter didn't interrupt. He simply listened, something Eli wasn't used to. "I never really planned on ending up like this," Eli continued. "Things just got away from me. One bad break turned into another. After a while, It felt easier to keep moving than to try fixing anything. Walter nodded. Life's like that sometimes. One thing slips, then another. But that doesn't mean it's over for you. Eli looked up, unsure. You really think someone like me could turn things around? I've seen worse, Walter replied, and I've seen folks crawl out of deeper holes than the one you're in. What matters is whether you're willing to stop running long enough to start building. Eli absorbed the words quietly. The breeze ruffled his hair. And for a moment, he looked less like a drifter and more like a young man who'd simply been lost too long. I don't know what comes next, he admitted. That's all right, Walter said. Most people don't, but you don't have to figure everything out tonight. The garage behind them glowed softly under the hanging porch light, casting long shadows across the bench. Eli exhaled slowly, a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't just survival. And Walter, sitting quietly beside him, felt something shift too. A sense that neither of them would end this chapter the same way they started it. The evening deepened into a calm, quiet night. Walter and Eli were still sitting on the old bench, the porch light humming softly above them. The air carried a mild chill, but neither seemed in a rush to move. For the first time in a long while, Eli felt a sense of stillness he didn't want to lose. Just as Walter was about to stand up, headlights appeared at the far end of the road, bright, steady, and far too polished to belong to anyone from around this neighborhood. A sleek black sedan slowed as it approached the garage, its engine quiet but unmistakably powerful. Eli stiffened immediately, his shoulders tightening as though bracing for bad news he didn't yet know. The car rolled to a stop in front of them. A man in a pressed suit stepped out, mid-40s. Clean-cut, confident in a way that made Eli look down instinctively. The stranger held a small folder in his hand, and his eyes scanned the area with purpose before landing on Eli. Evening, Walter said cautiously. Can we help you? The man nodded once. I'm looking for someone named Eli Turner. Eli's breath caught. It had been a long time since anyone called him by his full name. That's me, he said softly. The stranger walked closer, stopping a few steps away. He opened the folder and held up a photo, an old image of Eli. Younger, smiling in a way he barely remembered being able to. My name is Daniel Hayes, the man said. I work for a private outreach organization. We've been trying to find you for months. Eli blinked, confused. Why? Daniel's expression softened. Your older brother reached out to us. He's been trying to reconnect. He didn't know where you'd gone or whether you were safe. He asked us to find you and tell you. He never gave up. Eli froze, unable to speak. The weight of the words settled on him like a storm he hadn't expected, not harsh, but overwhelming. Walter watched him carefully, sensing this moment meant more than anything said in the last 2 days. Daniel continued, if you're willing, he wants to help you get back on your feet. A place to stay, a fresh start, whatever you need. Eli swallowed hard, voice barely steady. I didn't think anyone was looking for me. Walter placed a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder. Seems like someone was. For a long moment, Eli stared at the ground, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Then he finally lifted his eyes, first to Daniel, then to Walter. I don't know what comes next, Eli whispered, but maybe it's time I stop running. Walter nodded with quiet pride. You've already started, son. As the night settled fully over the garage, Eli took his first step toward a future he never believed he could have. And Walter, watching from the doorway of the old shop he'd built his life in, felt a quiet peace knowing he'd helped guide one more lost soul home.